And welcome to today's screencast for Tuesday, November 26th. And this is for Kingsford Middle School 6th grade students to get a brief intro into the world of spreadsheets. We're going to take a little unit study of spreadsheets and give you some exposure as to how to create one. So anyhow, throughout the course of this video, you are going to have to pause the video and go back between watching the video and using Google Drive. That's the choice of a spreadsheet application that we're going to use for this little demonstration. So at various times, you're going to have to pause and go back and perform these steps in creating a spreadsheet. So anyhow, the first step in working with spreadsheets is to really understand what they are. And a spreadsheet, for all practical purposes, can be thought of as a giant, very powerful calculator. So we use the spreadsheet in computers as a calculator, kind of a tool to do some basic math for us. But a spreadsheet is much more than that, in that it allows us to analyze numbers a lot faster than you might get with a calculator. So anyhow, the first thing you're going to have to do is get into your Google Drive, as I am. And if you're not there, then pause the video and head over and get into your Google Drive. But now what we're going to do is click on Create. And unlike doing documents and presentations, we're going to choose Spreadsheet, green. And what you get is a series of rows and columns. And wherever these rows and columns intersect, you have what's called a cell. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm clicking on these various cells. And the first thing we want to do when we work with a spreadsheet, like all files, is to click up at the top where it says Untitled and give it a more meaningful name. And we're going to be creating a grade book. So we're going to click OK after we've named it as such. And we are now ready to start creating our electronic grade book. And I like the gradebook as an example because it allows us to analyze numbers without having to use the old calculator like teachers used to have to do way back in the past. So to start things off, we're going to start off in cell A1 by entering a simple label. And a label is nothing more than text that you type in to give your spreadsheet some kind of information so that people looking at it understand what they're looking at. So in cell A1, all we're going to do is type in grade book, and then to move your cursor down and to get the machine to accept your entry, what you're going to do is hit return. And if you keep hitting return, the cursor would enter the next item that you had. But in our case, let's just click down below into cell A3 and we can enter some more labels. So I'm going to put a label here in cell A3, and then if you have to pause the video in order to go back and add your own labels, then do it. But for now, all we're going to type in is the name of the students, and then we're going to do return, and I'm going to put in just 3 students, and you can do the same. You can use whatever student names you want. We're going to pretend that you are indeed teaching a class and you're responsible for grading kids, but the class size is going to be very small for the experience of creating a spreadsheet without having to put in a bunch of data. So in my spreadsheet, I'm going to be teaching Larry and Curly and Mo. Again, if you have to pause video to put your own student names in, then do so. But all you need is 3 names. And if you make a mistake in a spreadsheet, you can click on the cell where the mistake is, and you can press delete, the big delete on your delete key, and you could try it again. If it's just a typo, maybe you spelled Mo incorrectly like that, you can double click in the cell like I just did, and then you can just, backspace and fix your mistake. So anyhow, after you get your 3 names in, we're going to work across row 3. As you can see, I've got cell B3 highlighted. And I'm going to work across and enter some test headings. So I'm going to type in test 1. And we're going to work across like this, assuming we are going to set up our class for, let's say, 6 major tests. So to move your cursor over, you can press the tab key, and that'll jump you over one to the right. Or you could use the mouse to reposition yourself. But if you are fluent at using the keyboard, using the tab key is a lot faster. So if you have to pause your video, then do this, but we're going to type in test 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way across, in this fashion. Test 6. And that's how your spreadsheet should look now. All right, we're going to format it to look nice later on, but for now, let's just learn to type in those simple labels. And then we're going to move over here, and we're going to have a column for their average, so we can tell what average they had on all those tests. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and type in some fictitious numbers, and you can do the same. You don't have to match my numbers exactly. So just make up some test scores for each student, and we're going to base all of our tests out of 100 points. So you may want to pause the video and go out and add your test scores. Again, they don't have to match mine. It'd be a lot faster if you just made up some test scores. Okay, so for me, I'm just going to make Larry my A student. So he's always going to score something in the 90s. It's pretty consistent. Now, we're not going to type in an average. Later on, we're going to teach you how to do a formula that would calculate that average for us. Okay. Curly, I'm going to make him my C student. So he's always going to have scores, in the 70s range. He can dip down underneath 70. He might have like a 66, but then the next one up, he might have something in the low 80s. So it kind of averages out. But this person should be averaging, in the neighborhood, roughly in the 70s for your scores. So, okay. And then Mo, he's going to be all over the map. He's going to be one time in the 90s, and one time in the 70s, one time in the 50s. Okay, so Mo looks like he's a little bit inconsistent, but again, your numbers can be whatever you want them to be. They are not going to match mine. And now that we've got all of our students entered in our grade book and we have all of their scores, it's time to calculate the average score for each student. And as we know, to calculate an average, we'd want to add up all their scores and divide that number by the number of scores. Okay, but spreadsheets have built-in formulas that allow us to average them up on our own without having to do the parentheses and all the arithmetic. So usually for a beginner, what I'd like to encourage you to do is use this little drop down right here where you can insert these special functions. And if you look down at the drop down, these are the most commonly used functions. Sum, used to add up a bunch of numbers. Average is the one that we want because we're going to try to average up those numbers for each of those 3 students. So if I click on average, notice it inserts the word average with an equal sign, and then it puts parentheses. And then all we have to do is highlight the numbers we would like it to average. And so for Larry, we'd like it to average from 95 all the way through this other 95 in column G. Your numbers, again, are going to vary. But if you want, the easiest way to do this is probably to drag your mouse through this range of numbers. So I'm going to drag my mouse through these numbers, and it's going to put dotted lines around them. If I make a mistake and actually put something else in there, all I have to do is reach up to my keyboard and press the escape key, and I could try again. Okay, the escape key is the ESC key up in the corner. So if I try again, let's try average, and I select those numbers. Okay, that's what my formula should look like. Equals average of B4 through G4. That's how you pronounce that. Now, as soon as I press the return key on my keyboard, it should give me his average. Okay, so if you have to pause the video and go ahead and do the average for Larry, then you can do the same for Curly and Mo. And there is a way you can copy these, but for now, let's just get some practice at entering the formula. Okay, so I'm going to do the same. Average, and then Curly scores are here. So instead of saying, B4 through G4, notice it says B5 through G5. And I press the enter key, and it enters that as a formula. So if I do the same for, if I do the same here for Mo, and I highlight those numbers, looks like I made a mistake. I can try again. If you have a mistake like this and you didn't catch it, immediately you can press, highlight the cell and press the delete key and enter it, and then you could try it again. That's what I'm doing here. So, all right, now I should have my averages when I press return. Okay, so now that we have all of our data entered and we have the averages correctly calculated, it is time to format our spreadsheet so it looks a little bit nicer. And so therefore, we're going to start at the top and work our way down. Okay, now this is assuming the spreadsheet's done and there is no need to go back and add any more rows or columns. Okay, this is kind of the last thing you do. So I'm going to take gradebook and I'd like you to highlight from cell A1 all the way through H1. Again, if you mess up, you can press undo right here or hit Command Z. So when you click and drag, you click in cell A1 and you drag the mouse across to all of these cells. And the reason I dragged all the way across is so that I can center this title across that big width right there. And this item right here where it says merge cells, that's how you can merge your cells. And then if you go right next door, you can center your item. And then we like to usually, for titles, this is just like word processing. We probably want to boldface it and maybe increase your font size maybe to 12. So now your spreadsheet looks like that. Okay? Now the other thing we like to do is to take the headings. These are called column headings. And those should be bold-faced. So a lot like you did with the word processor, if you highlight those cells, you can use the big B or Command B for bold. And then we have a rule of thumb in spreadsheets that if you look at a column like column B, okay, the label over here, test 1's on the left side of the cell, but the numbers are on the right side. And it shouldn't be like that. You should take and maybe align the word test 1 on the right side so it lines up with the numbers. So it's unacceptable to have a label over here on the left side of the cell and the numbers on the right. So your solution is to highlight all of these cells and then either align them on the right side or it is acceptable to center them. So in our case, let's align them on the right side. And it looks like this. That's acceptable. And then the other thing we probably want to do is take each of these columns and make them a little bit less wide. See all this empty space here we don't need? And the way that you do that is you point right between the two column headings, B and C, and you end up on this line right here. Even though the arrow points to the right, you can click and drag it so that it goes back to the left a little bit. Okay? So we'd like to do that for each of these columns. Try to size them evenly. In a future lesson, we'll learn how to do multiple columns, but for now, just to get practice, you can use this technique and it works fine. And this is called formatting your spreadsheet. Okay. Now for the averages, I could make that smaller, but before I do that, I probably want to take these numbers and have the computer round this for me. All right, cut off the decimal so it looks a little bit nicer, or maybe display it to one decimal place. So the way that you do that is you highlight these three numbers that have the decimal numbers in them, and then over here you have a 1, 2, 3. This is where you can format for different types of numbers. So if I hit the drop down where it says more formats, let's try to find one that rounds it either to 1 or 2 decimals. So this one might be handy. It says 2 decimals. I see it's front and center right out of the box here. So if I choose that, that looks pretty nice. So he has a 95.67 average. And if you bring that column size down, it looks a little bit nicer. So that is how you basically create a spreadsheet and use the function command average to average a bunch of numbers. Now here's the powerful part of the spreadsheet that I want you to try. All right, take for each of the students and change a couple of their test scores. And as you change your test score, if I give Larry, who currently has a 95.67, if I give him a real bad test score, 58, and I press return, you'll notice that this updates itself automatically. So that's really the power of the spreadsheet, your ability to change a number and have it automatically update in the average. So this gets into variables in mathematics, but for now, you understanding how to create a spreadsheet, which is just rows and columns of numbers, and enter a formula to get the machine to do some kind of calculation on the numbers is a big advantage. Back in the old days, kids, when I had to do grades, I never had a spreadsheet available. So I would have to take all of my grade books, which are all hard copy grade books. We've seen teacher grade books before. I used to carry them around. They were red. And we'd have to use a calculator and add up all the student scores and then divide by the total for every student to get their their quarterly average.